Poland is a country that has been wiped off the map, divided between three empires, and razed to the ground. Just a few decades ago, it received humanitarian aid simply to stave off starvation. Residents left the country en masse, and today, the same Poles who left to work in the UK are returning en masse. And in just a few years, Poland will be richer than the UK itself. How is this even possible? How is a country that was recently considered one of the poorest in Europe suddenly experiencing in its most successful period in its 1,000-year history? What's its secret? What single feature helped Poland first emerge from the crisis and then become one of the fastest growing countries in Europe? I'll tell you all about it. 1945. A bloody war had just ended. Poland had been virtually wiped out. All its cities lay in ruins. Warsaw, in fact, is considered the most devastated city in history. 90% of the city was razed to the ground. And while the US was creating the Marshall Plan and rebuilding Western Europe, Poland fell under the influence of the USSR. And Poland, as you know, became part of the Eastern Bloc. With totalitarianism, a one-party system, the state controlled everything. However, Poland still had its own peculiarities. Let's start with geography. In Poland's case, this is both a blessing and a curse. It depends on the time. Look, Poland is located in the center of the so-called Greek European plain. It's very easy to transport caravans and conduct trade here. However, at the same time, it was very difficult to defend these lands, as the army could move unhindered. Ultimately, this curse will lead to the country's demise. In the 18th century, three countries, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, will divide the entire country between themselves. And Poland, throughout its history, has been caught between East and West. This is clearly evident in 1979. The Pope comes to Poland, and this is a special moment. As I said earlier, Poland is under the influence of the USSR. They have communism, which is atheism. There is no place for religion there. But millions of people come to his mass. It's the largest gathering in the country's history. But how is this possible? The fact is that the Pope is Polish, John Paul II. His real name is Karol Wojtyła. He's the first non-Italian Pope in 500 years. And for Poland, this is a source of pride, a huge event. One might even say a national joy. All this, let me remind you, took place under a communist regime that controlled everything. And here we have the Pope, a figure distinct from the regime.
Here in Yasna Gora today, church officials charge government authorities with preventing the faithful from coming.
Catholicism is generally an important part of both. When Poland adopted Catholicism in 966, the region appears in chronicles as Polonia. This is the beginning of their state, and look at the map of churches in Poland. There are over 10,000 of them. But let's return to 1979. His key phrase is "Do not be afraid." The people see in him something they haven't seen for a generation. Opposition to the current regime, that life can be lived differently. People felt stronger than the authorities. Millions heard a speech for the first time that lacked communist rhetoric. A mass awakening of national self-awareness began. This triggered changes that were not yet visible, but already irreversible. Later, historians credited this moment with making Poland what it's today. Literally a few months after his visit, mass protests began in Poland. Workers were dissatisfied with working conditions, and Poland, one of the poorest countries at the time. It regularly received humanitarian aid, and again, parcels with basic goods were sent from the West through church organizations. The protesters achieved some concessions. Most importantly, after them, the Solidarity Trade Union emerged in the country. It attracted 10 million members, and it was not controlled by the party. This became the largest independent movement in the socialist bloc, led by Lech Walesa, a former auto mechanic and electrician, he almost immediately became one of the country's leading political figures. This alarmed the authorities, and in 1981, martial law was imposed. Solidarity was banned and driven underground. In 1983, the Pope returned to the country. This was against a backdrop of arrests, curfews, and tanks in the streets. Despite this, millions of people once again gathered for Mass. The Pope spoke openly about human rights, freedom of conscience, and individual dignity. The world increasingly turned its attention to Poland, putting pressure on local authorities. The martial law was lifted. Once again, the Church gave people hope, instilling in them the idea of freedom. This continued for several years. In 1987, the Pontiff made his third visit. Poland was exhausted. The economy was in crisis, shortages, queues, and debts were mounting. Millions of people again took to the streets. He speaks of social justice, workers' rights, and the right to participate in the life of the country. It's obvious to everyone. He's talking about solidarity again, only without mentioning it directly to avoid censorship. After this, mass protests begin to gain legitimacy. Finally, just 2 years later, in 1989, Poland holds the round table and the first partially free elections. The communists lost. Let me remind you that the Warsaw Pact still existed at that point. But if you think everything has become perfect in the flesh, you're wrong. The economy is in dire straits, with inflation skyrocketing. Here comes another man, Leszek Balcerowicz, the Minister of Finance. He proposed a radical transition from a planned economy to a market one. Shock therapy. Reforms are never easy, and this one was tough. Back then, 90% of enterprise were under state control, and now everything is being privatized. And so it's in all spheres. Just imagine you are stuck in a car on a narrow road and need to turn around. How long will it take you? Now multiply that by the scale of the entire country. But the Poles endured and rallied. From 1992 to 2019, Poland's economy grew continuously. Even in 2009, when the entire European Union economy was declining, Poland continued to grow. But that was only the beginning. In 2004, Poland joined the European Union. A new stage of the country's development began, and Pope John Paul II played a role again. At first, not all Poles supported joining the European Union. For months, polls showed only 58%, but 20 days before the referendum, John Paul II addressed the Poles and urged them to vote yes. The Pope rarely intervened so openly in politics, especially so directly. Trust in the European Union increased, especially among older and traditional Catholics, those who had been hesitant. Ultimately, 77% of Poles voted for joining the EU. This move was a win-win for everyone. Poland received money, new markets, and trade boomed. The rest of Europe gained 40 million cheap laborers. A huge number of Poles emigrated to other European countries, especially to the UK. In total, Europe invested approximately 200 billion euro in the Polish economy. The country built roads, schools, universities, and infrastructure in general. Just compare its development with neighboring Ukraine. Also, it was initially richer. Poland then made a huge leap forward, and joining the European Union helped accelerate this. Or look at its export. Almost all its trade occurs within the continent, especially with Germany. And while in 2004 Poles were leaving to work abroad, now they're returning. And by 2030, Poland will be richer than the UK. It's currently becoming one of the EU's leading countries. At the same time, it's increasing military spending to 5% of GDP and aiming to increase its military strength to 500,000, making it a key force in NATO. Whether they'll succeed is a big question. Firstly, its population is rapidly aging. Births are very low here, and migrants are reluctant to be accepted. Plus, the country has little domestic production. That means all the cars, technology, and other things it exports are foreign brands. What if they decide it's now more profitable to produce than elsewhere in the world? Secondly, there is a strong internal divide within the population. Look at this map. These are the result of the 2023 elections. The East is conservative, the West liberal. Now this map, and this one, and so on, and so forth. Even the wild boar and deer are scattered along these borders. These are consequences of what happened hundreds of years ago, but they still influence the country. I'm sure you've already noticed that the borders run along the lines where three empires once divided them. In Germany, the Industrial Revolution began immediately after the Napoleonic Wars. Industry, railways, and so on were built. Cities began to grow rapidly, and a broad urban class with a corresponding lifestyle and culture emerged. At the same time, the Russian and Austro-Hungarian empires, which continued to trade exclusively in raw materials, purchased almost all industrial products from abroad. That's why the East has a larger rural population, which traditionally remains conservative. Today, Poland is trying hard to overcome this. It's building infrastructure that is tough, especially funds. Whether they'll succeed remains an open question. But despite all the differences, the aging population, the divide between East and West, Poland has something other countries often lack. Its ability to unite in critical moments. From solidarity, which changes the course of history, to reforms that were sustained only thanks to societal patience, to the national consensus that allowed the country to join the European Union. Poland isn't perfect. It still needs to address demographic issues, modernize its industry, and learn to live without relying on foreign investors. But the main thing is that the path has already been set. And this path leads upward. Because if a country that was wiped off the map, divided by three empires, razed to the ground, which began with humanitarian aid and chronic poverty, if such a country can become the economic engine of Europe in a single generation, then the most important thing has already happened. It has learned to change. This means Poland has a chance for another historic breakthrough, perhaps its most important yet. And what Poland will look like in 20 years will depend not only on geography and reforms, but only whether it can once again do what it once did, unite in the most difficult moments. Thank you for watching to the end. I would appreciate your feedback in the form of like, comment, and of course a subscription. See you at the next story.